Hi everyone. A bit over a year ago I purchased an aircraft, and in this video I'll cover the reasons for purchasing it, the journey that led me to the airplane that I own now, and finally I'll close out with the fixed and variable costs of owning and operating general aviation aircraft in South Africa. Let me start with the events that convinced me to pursue buying an aircraft. Here are the chapters and times in the video if you want to jump ahead. Going back to January 2021, I had my PPL for a year. I decided to get my rating on a Piper Arrow in order to rent something faster than the standard school Cessna 172. This, as the flying I planned, were mostly for longer cross-country flights. A few months later, I booked the only Arrow at my school for a 270 nautical mile cross-country flight, and unfortunately somebody had a gear-up landing with it days before my booking. So I was forced to take a 172, which added nearly an hour each way. There I was, at about 80 hours, and a bit over 2 years into my aviation adventure, when my attention turned to researching the purchase of an aircraft. Besides the aircraft performance, there were a few other driving factors to this as well. Availability of school planes, the state of school planes, which usually lacked equipment like GPS or autopilot, paying for rental aircraft on cross countries even when you're not flying. They usually impose a 3-hour minimum rental charge per day. And on the upside of owning one, it should provide the familiarity of flying the same aircraft, getting something more capable in speed and useful load than a Cessna 172. So with my motivation in hand, I set out to learn more. Starting by learning from others is very useful. I like the YouTube content from Airplane Academy, where Charlie compares renting versus buying. I'll provide a link to that video in the comments, and he's got great other content as well. I was encouraged when in one of the videos I watched, aircraft prices were compared to that of an above-average new car. Keep in mind that general aviation aircraft last a very long time, and flying a 50-plus-year-old aircraft is pretty common. One can find a certified aircraft from about R500,000, with a sweet spot, in my opinion, of about 1.5 million rand. With that in mind, if you drive around Johannesburg, you realize that most cars could be very nice aircraft. Of course, you can pay a lot more for newer aircraft, like a Sling High Wing costing north of 4 million rand, and a Cirrus SR22 can easily reach 10 million rand. I settled on budgeting about 1.2 million rand. I jumped onto Google and searched for Cessna and Piper aircraft for sale. What you quickly learn is that the value is mostly determined by the engine time. Engines typically go about 2,000 hours between overhaul, and an overhaul can cost far more than 500,000 rand, so the more available time on the engine, the more expensive the aircraft. To decide what to look for, the main thing you need to consider is your mission. What is your intention with the use of the aircraft most often? The kind of considerations are the number of people that you want to fly, which talks to the aircraft's useful load, cruise speed and your performance requirements, avionics requirements, such as being AIFR capable, personal preferences like high wing versus low wing, additional things like flight into known icing or FIKI may be important to you in your geography, or perhaps having an airframe parachute system like what you find on a Cirrus and some aircraft, sling aircraft. Many things contribute to safety though, like having spare performance and more useful load than you need, a turbocharged engine for high altitude operations, a well-maintained aircraft, and avionics like an autopilot. Of course, it would be nice to have everything, but budget is a strong consideration and reality check. My core mission was to use an aircraft to travel cross-country with friends and family. This automatically meant that safety and performance were key considerations, and I thought that being able to carry 3 average adults and a child should suit my mission. Once you've established your mission, it's time to consider your options. Firstly, would you like single engine or multiple engine aircraft? And this should not come as any surprise. Operating multiple engines will cost you more. You need to maintain and fuel times 2, but it can provide redundancy and often increases the speed compared to singles, but that does depend heavily on different variations. What may come as a surprise to you is that often you find multi-engine aircraft alongside single engines based on purchase price. Just be aware of the engine time and the operating costs. For single engines, I was pleased to learn during my training that redundancies built into single engine aircraft, like multiple fuel tanks, fuel pumps, separate electrical systems, magnetos, and spark plugs, really make it as safe as it possibly can be. I opted to go for the single engine option. Low wing versus high wing. Now this is really down to your personal preference. As the fuel is stored in the wings, the main difference is that high wing aircraft will use gravity feed to fuel the engine, while a low wing needs a fuel pump. Visibility differs from airplane to airplane anyway, but one key benefit of high wing is that it can offer shade as you are working outside the aircraft. It's typically easier to get into, and it would have 2 doors. Most older low-wing aircraft only have 1 door, but personally I wasn't fussy about either option. Then experimental versus certified. You get aircraft that have to go through rigorous regulatory type certification by the Civil or Federal Aviation Authority. This is the same authority that will investigate accidents or incidents. As they learn, they will issue directives that have to be complied with in order to remain airworthy. So effectively, you benefit from a lot of learning, but you pay a premium for this. Experimental aircraft have far more relaxed rules. It can be available to purchase in kits, to build yourself, and you have far more freedom in modifications and avionics. I think that with experimental, the brand you choose is critical. It's no secret that I'm a big fan of Sling Aircraft, which produces experimental aircraft in South Africa. They've become very successful in markets like the US and Australia, but a new or recent Sling was too far above my budget, and going for an older certified aircraft from the 60s or 70s was a better option for me. Looking through advertised airplanes is an emotional roller coaster. It just seemed that everything that looked great was way over budget, as that happens, of course. Then I stumbled upon this Mooney M20K 231. It had impressive speed, and it was within my budget. I started researching the Mooney, and with more knowledge came more excitement. As I made arrangements to view this aircraft, I was sensible enough to check with the insurance. Turns out I was uninsurable for a complex aircraft with retractable landing gear due to my number of hours, although I held a rating on a complex and retractable aircraft, the Piper Arrow. So this rained on my parade, and for the next 18 months I decided to let it go. Since the only Piper Arrow at my local airfield was out of commission, I did a Cessna 182 rating, and I rented one for a number of my adventures during this time. Having properly researched the Mooney purchase, it made me think of the practical side of ownership and where I would hangar the aircraft. I did some inquiries at my home airfield of Grand Central, and although there was a shared hangar, there was no availability and a waitlist. So I joined the waitlist in anticipation that I would resume my search one day. I started looking again in February 2022, by which time I had many more hours, and I found this Piper 6, which insurance was happy to cover, and I went for a test flight. It looked great outside, but the panel and interior would need attention. And what ended up killing the deal for me is that this was the 260 horsepower version, which practically makes it a 4-seater, and performance concerns at the higher altitude airfields like the ones around Johannesburg. The 300 horsepower version would be a better buy for that size aircraft, but I just could not find any available. I came across a stunning Cessna 177 Cardinal, and of course I would once again go down the rat hole of researching everything and falling in love with the Cessna Cardinal. At that time, I had a conversation with an experienced aviator, and he convinced me to look into the Piper Cherokee 235. It is a high performance, it has exceptional useful load, and it's been a favorite of general aviation in South Africa. After then researching, the Cherokee 235 and comparing the useful load with it between that and the Cardinal, I finally decided that the 235 was the aircraft for me. If you've ever looked into the Cherokee lineup, you will know that there are a lot of variations. The Cherokee 235 started in 1963 and received big updates in 1969, with the C model getting a third side window, updated instrument panel and power controls. And then in 1972 they stretched the fuselage by 5 inches or 13 centimeters. That creates extra legroom for the rear passengers. Finding 1969 models or newer proved difficult, but I found a 1969 model C235 on sale in a nearby town. It was far enough to fly and an opportunity for me to take my flight instructor with to get a second opinion. So we rented a Piper Archer, which was available from the school on that day, to go view it. The price was great, 700,000 Rand, but it only had about 400 hours left on the engine, and something just didn't feel right. Having flown there in the Archer, which also has the stretched fuselage, I realized that I needed to find a 1972 or newer, especially as I've now convinced myself to go from a Cherokee 6 to a 4-seater. I wanted it to be a comfortable 4-seater. By now, I was on every aircraft for sale group on Facebook and in contact with many people in the industry. Finally, I came across Zulu Sierra Delta Echo Delta, a 1974 Piper 235, which Piper calls the Pathfinder. It was a bit above my budget, but it practically had a new engine with only 178 hours, a new 3-blade prop, upgraded to 250 horsepower engine, 4,100 of total airframe hours. It's got the updated instrument cluster, the stretched fuselage, and as a bonus an STEC 30 autopilot. What I also really liked is that the aircraft was shared by a few friends with a similar mission like me for cross-country flights, and it was already hangared in Johannesburg, Rand Airport to be specific. I wasn't a fan of the interior, and the exterior wasn't great either, but it was the only 1972 or newer 235 I found in months. And after I took my wife to view it, we decided to go ahead. Since it was already hangared, I decided to just carry on with the arrangements at Rand Airport. Even though I was still at the waiting list at Grand Central Airport, Rand came in at less than half the price, and it was only 10 minutes further away from my home. Since it's not a decision that I regret using Rand Airport, as it's got 4 runways, which almost eliminates crosswind landings, and there's a lot of facilities from AMO refurbishment to avionics. I was now an aircraft owner. This was just over a year ago, and I'm really happy that it's lived up to my expectations so far. It is extremely convenient to have an aircraft always available. It is nice to call the shots on whatever I want to do with it, and not to be charged on the days not flying during a cross-country trip. And she carries 310 liters of fuel, so on the days I go flying on previous fuel, it feels like that day's flying doesn't cost anything. The privilege of being able to pursue the purchase of an aircraft is not lost on me, and I'm super grateful to be in the position where I can live out this passion and share the adventures with you. So in conclusion, let's look at the cost of my purchase. First, the capital cost. The purchase price of the aircraft was 1.32 million Rand. Then fixed cost. Hangarage is about 3,000 per month. Insurance is about 28,000 Rand a year, or 2,300 Rand per month. That brings the total fixed cost per month to about 5,300 Rand. Variable costs. Fuel and maintenance goes into variable costs. And in terms of fuel, on a recent trip I flew from Johannesburg to Upington, which is 397 nautical miles or 735 kilometers away. It took 3 hours. I refueled on arrival, filling up 129 liters or 4,425 Rand, which works out to be 34 Rand 40 per liter. That same trip by road is 793 kilometers, but it takes nearly 9 hours of dedicated driving. If we work on a car's fuel consumption being 10 liters per 100 kilometers, that would be 80 liters of petrol used, and at 22 Rand 83 per liter, that would be a total cost of 1,826 for the car option. So aircraft wins on speed by far, but it comes at a premium of 2,600 Rand one way. In this example, by road was only 60 kilometers further. Other journeys where road access is not that direct will definitely favor the aircraft more. My first year was heavy on maintenance, as I wanted everything to be working perfectly, and that amounted about 100,000 Rand. I ended up spending more to cover a full exterior and interior refurbishment, which cost about 230,000 Rand. I made a video on this massive transformation. The way I'd like to think about this is that I'm investing in a US dollar-based asset that can be moved anywhere in the world. It is a great way to have a diversified portfolio that includes an international asset not subject to Rand depreciation. With similar 235s going for $130,000 or 2.4 million Rand, I should hopefully see a return on investment already. My Flying FA website is up and running. Fly on over to find out more. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. Please remember to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.